I'm gonna go ahead and start now. Okay. Okay, we're gonna get started. Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Margarita Christie. I'm Director of Women and Gender in International Development at the Center for International Research, Education, and Development. And first of all, I have to say, I'm very excited. We're here in person for the first time since February of 2020. This is our first in-person event. It is hybrid, so we have a lot of people on Zoom. Hello, Johanna. So Lumbini Barua is my graduate assistant, and she's supporting the discussion series online, even though she's in a conference in South Carolina. So thank you, Lumbini. And then Jess Spence, who's a PhD student here as well at ALCE. She'll be our next speaker, and she's here also for technical support. So welcome to the hybrid Women and Gender Development discussion series. So Emily's visit to Virginia Tech this week is co-sponsored by the Department of Political Science, the Planning, Governance, and Globalization PhD program, which he's a graduate of, the School of Public and International Affairs, better known as SPIA, Africana Studies, and the Virginia Water Resources Research Center. I'm very grateful for their support. So please note that our event will be recorded and will be available on our website a week or so after this event, as well as our previous discussion series speakers. So if you don't want to be recorded and you're on Zoom, just turn your camera off if you don't want your image recorded. So as of this morning, we had 75 people registered. Most of those are Zoom, 20 were registered for in-person, 48 were Virginia Tech. But in addition to many diverse folks in the United States, we had people from 8 other countries registering as coming in from Benin, Eswatini, Kenya, Mozambique, Nigeria, Pakistan, Senegal, and the UK. So welcome to everybody. The full calendar and updates for this year's discussion series is available on our website, on the CRED website. So, you know, I have to ask, given the events of this week, the earthquake in Monday, I'd like to ask for a moment of silence for over 17,500 victims. Okay, next I would like to read a short version of the land and labor recognition. Virginia Tech acknowledges that we live and work on the Tulo-Monacan people's homeland. We recognize their continued relationships with their lands and waterways. We further acknowledge that the Morrill Land Grant College Act of 1862 enabled the Commonwealth of Virginia to finance and found Virginia Tech through the forced removal of Native nations from their lands in California and other areas in the West. We also recognize that enslaved Black people generated revenue and resources used to establish Virginia Tech and were prohibited from attending until 1953. Through inclusive VT, the institutional and individual commitment to ut prosum that I may serve in the spirit of community, diversity, and excellence, we commit to advancing a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive community. And I direct you to the inclusive VT page of Virginia Tech for the full version of those statements. Okay, some brief housekeeping notes. This will last approximately 45 minutes. Our speaker's presentation will be 20 to 25 minutes, followed by about 20 minutes question and answer discussion. All of the participants joining via Zoom will be muted to enable the speaker to present without interruption. After Dr. Van Houweling's presentation, people can raise their hand to ask questions of the speaker. People joining via Zoom can also raise their hand, or you can at any time during the presentation put your questions into the chat, and we'll be saving those into a Google Doc and reading them later. So if you prefer for us to read them, you can do it that way. We ask for everyone to be respectful and treat all participants with kindness and consideration without discriminatory behavior. So again, this is being recorded and you'll have access to it later via our website. So in advance, I'd like to let you know that we'll be sending you a survey link, and we ask you to please do it. You can tweet us now by tagging at WGD_VT. Okay, finally, I know you're here to hear from Emily. So to introduce our speaker, Dr. Emily Van Houweling's teaching and research interests include water and sanitation, gender and development, participatory planning, and decolonizing development. She has experience working and teaching in several countries in sub-Saharan Africa and has most recently conducted community-based research on water and sanitation access with the unhoused population in Denver, where she lives now. Her research has been published in leading journals, gender, environment, and development journals, and her book, Water Aid in Mozambique, Gendered Perspectives Have Changed, was published by Cambridge University Press and just came out last year. As I said earlier, she received her PhD from Virginia Tech in the Planning, Governance, and Globalization PhD program. I also want to say that I was on Emily's PhD committee many years ago, and then she was an associate director of the Women in Gender Development program. So it was really exciting to be able to have her back. And many people on campus were also very excited to see her. So the title of her talk today is Water Projects and Gender Goals in Mozambique, How the Technocratic Culture of International Development Conflicts with Community Perspectives. So please welcome Dr. Emily Van Houweling.
Thank you, Dr. Marisa. It's really great to be back and see so many familiar faces. I've lived here a long time and all of this research really started here, so it's good to be back. I first went to Mozambique in 2010 with my advisor, Ralph Hall, and a group of students and faculty members from Stanford University. And our task was to set up an evaluation of a rural water project that was being installed in northern Mozambique by the Millennium Challenge Corporation. And I didn't know at that time that I'd made a commitment that would keep me coming back for several times, spending 2 years there over the next 8 years, to really follow this water project. And by spending so much time there, closely following this project, I was able to see how this one example of how a development project unfolded, how it affected rural life, how it was perceived and negotiated by community members. And I think it really offers a lot of insights that are useful in countries all over the world. And it allows me to tell a very different story about development than the one that's typically told by aid organizations, engineers, or economists, one that really elevates the voices of those most impacted by water scarcity, in this case, the women living in these rural communities. A little bit about the place, because I really want to shape the narrative around a specific cultural and social place. Working in northern Mozambique in a province called Nampula. The main ethno-linguistic group there were the Makua. They're small farmers. They farm beans, rice, cassava. They sell some cashews and some coconuts, kind of a mix of Catholic and Islamic beliefs in this area. It's one of the poorest areas of Mozambique. Most people in the rural areas don't have electricity. They live in mud and brick houses, really low levels of education and literacy. And that's also reflected in the water situation, where before this project, 80% of people were getting water from shallow wells, like the ones you can see here, or seasonal springs, unprotected water sources, and that people were quite dissatisfied with their water situation. They were, especially during the dry season, from basically like September through November, December, really long walks to get water, long waits at the water source for it to recharge, lots of health problems related to this. And during the dry season, it really affected all aspects of life. Kids didn't go to school as often, social events were canceled, and people couldn't bathe or wash clothes. Some people said they even didn't have enough to drink during these months. So water was really connected to social practices, to livelihoods, to spiritual practices in this village. And it's something that connected people to each other and to the ancestors, and also to larger, like the aid organizations and to the government. In terms of the gender dynamics in this place, the Makua are a matrilineal society. So that means that women have quite a bit of power in kind of social and cultural, spiritual dimensions of life. Land is passed through on the women's side. And if there's divorce, the women stay with the land and the children on their mother's side. And gender roles are fairly complementary. There's quite a bit of flexibility in the gender division of labor. Women are the primary water collectors, but men will also help during the dry season. and depending on the family structure. Women are those that really control the traditional water source.
I would love to get rid of this so that it doesn't block your slides.
Okay. Women control the traditional water source, meaning they do like the daily management and maintenance, the cleaning of the water sources, regulating them. And these traditional water sources have a lot of social value for women. So it's a place where women get together from across villages. They can share information, they can socialize, they can get out of the sort of the confines of their home and the watchful eyes of men to just spend time with other women. It's also a place of shared work where they share doing dishes and laundry and information about like crop prices. So it has this important social value for women. And there's a lot of intersectional differences. Not all women are experiencing water scarcity in the same way. And these differences related to like class and age, political party affiliation, these actually come to light as the Rural Water Project takes into effect. So I'll speak to some of these in a minute. Now for the project itself, it consisted of the installation of 600 hand pumps in Nampula and then a neighboring district to the north called Cabo Delgado. And it was installed by it was funded by the Millennium Challenge Corporation. And they're a relatively new US aid organization. They really pride themselves on giving money to countries that have good governance criteria. And they try to also justify the projects according to an economic rate of return model. So their kind of mantra is economic growth. How do they say it? Poverty reduction through economic growth. So for this Rural Water Project, what they cared about were primarily two things that were supposed to result in more income being generated in the region, resulting in economic growth and poverty reduction. So the two things they cared about were time savings, that with installation of these hand pumps that women would be saving time collecting water. And the assumption was that they would use that time to enter income generating activities. Secondly, health. They thought that with this better quality of water being provided, people would spend less on doctors, and it'd also be more productive in the jobs that they're doing. So both of those goals were reduced to an income stream that fed into this economic rate of return model. The project was set up to be participatory and gender sensitive, managed by the community. To break a little bit of that down, by community-based management, they meant the formation of a water committee that consisted of 6 men and 6 women with pretty like rigid roles and how they would manage it. Also meant that people had to pay for water, that the community had to contribute a % to the capital cost to get this project. So that's kind of what they meant by participatory. We'll talk more about the gender sensitive aspects, but there was also this notion of women's empowerment achieved through time savings. So a lot of what I did was trying to interrogate some of these concepts that sound very good, but they're based on a lot of kind of faulty assumptions that don't take into account the context. So when I first went to Mozambique with the evaluation team, I got a chance to talk to people in the communities, also to the project implementers. And from what I observed, the range of indicators that we had been charged to assess really didn't represent the breadth or the depth of the impacts of this project. So I proposed to spend more time in these communities doing ethnographic research, and was lucky to get a Fulbright that supported me to have that independence and sort of critical thought about the project. But I wanted to capture kind of the social meanings around water and understand how this project was translated as it moved its way down to the community and how people were perceiving it. So I kind of randomly chose 5 communities that were getting hand pumps and would rotate kind of through these communities, camping with my research assistant, staying with either the leaders or the water committee in each place, and spent a lot of time just accompanying women on their daily tasks, whether that was getting water or farming or shelling cashews here. And that was a chance to really understand, their experiences and ways of knowing and give value to that. Also did a lot of interviews with the project implementers, all the way from the government to the community workers that were implementing the project. In this case, they were called like animators. They were doing the trainings with the water committee, getting things set up for the drilling to begin. So I describe my research methodology as feminist because I started with a concern that was really central to women's lives, this water scarcity. And I tried to use this practice of reflexivity throughout my research process, really thinking about how who I am as this young white woman coming in, how it affected the way people saw me, my interpretation of events, and really trying to check kind of my frames of reference, like how am I interpreting something? And my research assistant there who's interviewing a woman, her name's Hortensia, and she was really critical in that process of helping me interpret and really translate. She would translate from Makua to Portuguese for me. And I think through this ethnographic research, I was able to capture some of the complexity of women's lives and their relationships with other women in a very deliberate attempt to kind of counter some of the narratives that you hear about, poor women from Africa being sort of oppressed by men and religion and the water situation, just showing that richness of their lives. So I found a lot of different things. I'm going to focus on a couple of those that are specifically related to gender. This was after being there kind of during the implementation, where I saw the wells go in, and then I was able to return 5 years later to see what had happened. If you remember back to the economic rate of return model, their big income stream was coming from time savings. And the women who used the hand pumps did save some time, but they used that time to socialize with other women, to take care of their families, to take care of their children, to farm more. So basically they were not, following this kind of very Western oriented narrative that women want to earn money and that's like their chief goal. There also weren't a lot of opportunities to earn money. So women were spending time in kind of traditional gender roles that were appropriate for mothers and wives. And I did a focus group where I asked, can you describe what a good wife, what are the characteristics of a good wife? Ask men and women, both, same with the husband. But for women, all the activities were really tied to water. So a good wife, she prepares food for her husband and serves it on time, cleans the dishes in the house, brings her husband bath water, does the laundry. All of these depend on water. And what happens during the dry season is women aren't able to satisfy these expectations. So it leaves them with a lot of anxiety and stress and a lot of like physical work burden during this time. So this is relieved when the hand pumps come and women are able to better fulfill these expectations. This is an interview from a man talking about how before or now things are common good in the house, like now after the hand pumps have come. In the past, before the hand pumps, women would be gone for a long time. They would come home late and prepare food late. Women didn't know where they were. Men didn't know where they were, wouldn't trust them. So there's improved relationships and trust in the household because of this, less conflict. From a women's perspective, she's talking about how they're using this time. So rather than, this kind of Western vision of a self-reliant, economically independent woman, the women, these Makua women, were finding kind of their fulfillment in these roles and in relationship to their community and their family. Another outcome was that few women left their traditional water sources. And there's actually complex reasons why people didn't use the hand pumps that I'll touch on. But for women especially, there was a reluctance first to pay for water. And this was because of beliefs that water is, part of the environment. It's given to us by God. There's a long history of us just being able to use water as we want, when we want, without any interference from, having any kind of transaction. So there was a real reluctance, especially among older people, to pay for the hand pump when they had free sources that were available. For women, they didn't want to lose the social aspects of the wells. So even women that used the hand pump continued to use the wells, where they would do laundry or dishes or get together with other women, because that was one of the few times they could really leave the house. Women talked it as really a respite for getting away from their husbands and having a chance to be with other women. It's where girls' initiation ceremonies happened here. Women could bathe naked, in private, and had that space. And the hand pumps, they were located in the center of the village, and there is really no privacy around them. So it took away all that socializing that women had at those more private wells. And that also women lost the control and autonomy they had, where they were really in control of the traditional wells. But at the hand pumps, the MCC came in with a very rigid management model that was supposed to be gender equitable according to kind of the imposed standards, but it meant that women really, the women that were managing the wells lost control, and they had to adhere to this other framework. And very few women were the presidents of the water committee, which was kind of the highest level. And a lot of the women ended up doing the work of the daily cleaning, and they're supposed to lock it every day and collect money. A lot of the work that put them in conflict with other people, and created more work and anxiety in their lives without any real benefits. Something else that was really unaccounted for by the MCC and also in the evaluation compared communities that got hand pumps to those that didn't, rather than looking at within a community that got a hand pump, what happened? Did everyone benefit, or some people left out? So when we did kind of a reanalysis of our data, we found there were actually more differences within a community than between communities in terms of who benefited and who didn't. This came out of quantitative analysis, and also from what I found. But there is a geographic division, because these were large and dispersed communities, and a single hand pump was provided in the middle of them, meaning, why would you walk an extra couple kilometers to get water when you had something closer to your house? So those that were right next to the hand pump were really the ones that benefited the most. And that political decision of where to locate the hand pump was a big deal. There's also an economic division, because you had to pay for the hand pump. I estimate that like 20% of people really couldn't pay for it, and another 20% had trouble kind of seasonally paying for it. And then there's a political division. The politics of Mozambique mean that the Frelimo party has been in charge of the country for a long time, and government projects are associated with Frelimo party. So the minority party Renamo, they felt like they were not asked to be part of any water committee. They were not represented, but most just community members felt like they were not allowed to use the hand pumps. And you can see these quotes kind of testifying to these ideas, and that the community members really perceived these differences and how it amplified some of these existing inequalities. I'm going to try and move that a little bit.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to find. I don't see the view button. Yeah, I hate that.
Sorry, we're trying to improve the view for you on Zoom.
So the people on Zoom can fix it on their own computers,
Okay.
so they're fine. It's just,
Yeah, it's just the people here. But there should be a button that says view.
hey, yes, thank you.
What is diarrhea?
Directo, just the right. It means like the right to. Yay, thanks, Tom. And finally, another community conflict that was exacerbated was this happened between communities. And the whole project, they installed 600 hand pumps, but 175 of them, an additional 175 were negative boreholes, meaning the drilling rig comes in, they drill 200 meters down, and they don't find water. And the geophysics of the area are very difficult. So this was common, but the sad thing is there wasn't really any follow-up in these communities. So they were left very suspicious and distrustful, even more so of aid and of their neighbors that got it and when they didn't. And it would literally be, the neighboring community was able to get a hand pump and they weren't. So there was a lot of tension that was exacerbated with this project without any follow-up. Okay, so I talked about some of the things that I saw that didn't go as expected. And a lot of the other goals have a kind of unravel in a similar way. There are a lot of unintended social cultural consequences. And when I visited 5 years later, all the water committees had fallen apart and a lot of the hand pumps had technical issues. And my explanation of kind of what went wrong here starts with the critical development theory premise that we can't impose this rigid blueprint on a very specific social cultural place. But I'm trying to extend that idea and also look at the institutional culture of development and how the values, the norms, the incentives shape the implementation of this project. And this is not like trying to blame development workers, but to understand the environment and the culture in which they're working. That determines really the rules of the game and what is seen and what can be done. So I'll talk about a couple of these that I see as being quite relevant. There was this idea of best practices, and all of these terms like sustainability and capacity building, community management, women's empowerment, they follow a set of fairly predictable sequences, and they're not really adapted to the context. There's no real consideration of critical literature for almost any of these problems that we found that with the project. There was other literature showing that we knew this would kind of happen if you would have consulted some different literature, if you would have talked to a different, broader range of people in the planning. But it was this idea of best practices that this hand pump model follows, at least throughout Africa. And it's used, in the project development almost to convince you of the legitimacy of the project by using these terms without any grounding in the context. The resources, follow the incentives. So there was very little money devoted to understanding the context at the beginning, the planning pieces, and very little at the end to ensure sustainability. All the money was going to put these hand pumps in the ground. And that meant that things like the gender analysis weren't really taken seriously. There wasn't time or the people, the skilled people in place to do a real gender analysis or to do any sort of gender trainings. Things were implemented very superficially. It was a lot about counting the number of trainings done. And at the end of the day, the incentives for the MCC were meeting this economic rate of return model and spending the money. In fact, several of the implementers said, what Congress really cares about at the end of the day is that we've spent the money. So that really structures where those resources are going. There's also this hierarchy that was quite obvious between the MCC and the communities, where there wasn't any way for knowledge to pass up the chain of command to really get to the ears of the decision makers. And when the MCC came to Mozambique, they had a series of meetings and really orchestrated field visits where they're taken to the best communities, and the communities know how to perform. Also, they show them certain things and hide certain things in order to get what they want from this project. So it really, this distance hid the on-the-ground implementation challenges. And there's a lot of people in between those two, right? Like the MCC and then the community. We had, in this case, the community animators or mobilizers. They're the ones you see in these pictures, kind of working with the community, telling them what's happening about the project, doing the trainings. And they're really interesting to get to know, because they had this really difficult challenge of trying to translate these sometimes inane, for us, like research protocols, and for the MCC, protocols for how they have to form a water committee into language that the community understands. And then most of the community animators felt quite connected to the communities. They were empathetic to the struggles of the women. Many of them had grown up in rural areas. They spoke Makua. But they were also bound within incentives of the MCC. They had short time periods. They didn't have many resources. They had to do a certain number of trainings. And they had very simple reporting forms. At the end of the day, they do this community meeting. They count the number of women and men and, really simple things like the number of latrines that are constructed without saying anything about, who's making decisions, who's talking, the community understanding, how they're perceiving this. Are there any conflicts? What are the politics around this stuff? So that simple reporting form gets translated into increasingly simplistic, narrow categories until it goes to Congress and there's, a single number that represents the success of this project. What am I doing on time? Okay. It's sort of make some concluding thoughts here. So the outcomes really depend on whose perspective matters. So the ERR that was calculated by the MCC at the end of the project was quite high. It was like 20%. It's pretty good, meaning that the benefits outweigh the cost by 20% in terms of income. But when you look at all of these other ways that you could understand the project, you come to very, very different conclusions. So I think most impact evaluations have a narrow set of categories that they start with that are, primarily like Western based, and they leave those local perspectives out. And in this case, if we were looking at local perspectives, we would have very different categories for evaluating success. So I think it really challenges the idea that evaluation reports represent some kind of omniscient truth about good or bad, or that they even reflect the opinions of the beneficiaries themselves. Whoops. And rather that they're really tied to the ideologies and the values and the norms of development. And it leaves out all these ways that women are really understanding change in their own lives and doesn't recognize their own priorities and their full identities. And that kind of goes to this notion beyond success and failure. The hand pumps were not an unmitigated good or an unmitigated bad. There was a lot of complexity and ambivalence that people had towards the hand pumps, depended on who you talked to. Within every community, there were some people that were very enthusiastic and happy, relieved to have the hand pumps, alongside of those who had benefited in no way and were quite skeptical and distrustful of the project. And women had something to gain, but something to lose from this project as well. Some women were happy to have water closer, but some continued to use the customary sources for these social purposes, and they often didn't want to pay for the hand pump during certain seasons. They also had a lot of conflicts. It also created a lot of conflicts between women and with leaders and with the water committee. And many women saw these water sources as complementary. So they didn't abandon their customary water points, and they would use the hand pumps in ways that they wanted. So when they wanted to save time and just get some clean water for drinking, they'd use the hand pumps. At the same time, they'd still get to the customary water points every day for those social aspects. And I think that just that notion of kind of going between sources disrupts this straightforward like modernization trajectory where in development, we sort of assume that women will abandon the traditional because it's sort of oppressive and move towards the modern where they'll become empowered. We see kind of in Nampula that women hold on to tradition that gives them power. They had a lot of power in their matrilineal society, but they're also ready to embrace those aspects of modernity that they see as improving their lives. This is a very strategic balance that they make for themselves. Lastly, I think my research and this story inspires a lot of kind of modesty and curiosity in development, attention to like learning and adaptation, moving away from a notion that we'll have this simple cause and effect, and more towards something that builds on local understandings and this idea of fluidity and adaptation and learning during a project. And centering different voices and priorities in the process. So that's what I have. I'm excited for your questions and to elaborate on more where you're interested. Thanks.
Maybe we'll take some questions from here in the room if we have some, and then we have one from Larry Vaughn. And yes, if you can introduce yourself, and then Jess, if you can look at the Google Doc for any questions in the chat.
Thank you. Has NCC changed its opinion on this idea of subscription to water access, paying money, and how did they integrate that monetary cost with this idea that women would earn more money because some of that money has to go back into access to the water?
I don't think they've changed their prescription on the payment. That I was just talking to the new gender specialist assigned to the MCC. They have a new compact, surprisingly, given the governance challenges they've had, but they have a new compact, and the gender specialist was, she was already frustrated at its very beginning and saying that so many of these themes were being repeated. And the payment for money is something that's like part of a larger paradigm in rural water planning called like demand responsive planning. Where the idea is that the community will feel a sense of ownership if they pay for the water, and if they don't pay for it, they won't value it. But it's this very Western idea of how we value something and what ownership even means, and can we own water? So there's a lot of those ideologies that feed into this idea that people should pay for water. And you talk about the payment itself not being subtracted maybe from the ERR. That's a good point. There's so many contradictions in that they're pushing kind of these neoliberal principles of paying for water and this idea of sense of ownership alongside the idea of community participation, voluntary community participation, managing the water committee. Those people aren't paid, but yet they want the payment over here, but not over here. So it's kind of like you can make an ERR model that looks really good and leave some things out and emphasize others. And even the value they chose to put in for women's free time, it was very arbitrary. It was based on the wage, the national wage, and no woman was making that, and they weren't even doing income generating activities. So you can fill out those spreadsheets to your benefit, but leaving a lot of things out.
First of all, thank you. That was really excellent. Great to see you again. My name is Tom Archibald. I work at CRED. I'm wondering if in the focus groups with the implementers at various levels, you know, it would probably manifest differently for the animators as for like NCC country staff. To what extent were they aware of or critical of these broader paradigmatic contradictions? And, you know, because they could be aware of them, but then sort of trapped in the hegemony of this is just the way we do it, even if we know it's a little bit silly.
Yeah.
And you already spoke a little bit how the animators were kind of as intermediaries were in that tension and aware of it. But, so how did they grapple with that? And then the sort of higher ups that refer to the hierarchical model, were they aware of it and just trapped in it?
Yeah, they were most, you know, if you got people, if you're able to establish enough rapport that people talked to you in a real way. And often it was outside of the formal interview. It would be like me, you know, following them on their daily, you know, walking with them to get coffee, or they would make a remark, you know, this kind of remarks that you make over dinner that you might not share publicly, but oh man, like, we know this is a mess, or like, there's no way all the project implementers said, we know that there's no way these hand pumps are gonna last. And everyone knew it, and knew what needed to be done to make them last. But this is a 5-year compact, they're out, the government had no capacity to keep managing these hand pumps. And again, in the economic rate of return model, they put a 20-year, it was based on a 20-year expectation of the hand pumps working, and no hand pumps work that long with no support. So, and even at the highest level, what was this guy called? Like kind of the regional MCC guy, the highest level I met, you know, he really was interested in my stories and would relate it to other things he had seen, but said, you know, we're stuck, you know, it was such a rigid model. There wasn't like no room to deviate. You know, and people found, I think the implementers found small ways they could help and adjust things and turn their eye to things. Like, I know that a lot of communities weren't, in fact, requiring water payments during the rainy season. And some animators just ignored that. Others chose to, like, you know, get involved, but everyone has a little bit of flexibility, right? And there was, you know, one guy at the office level who said, you know, here's a little bit of extra money, we could buy t-shirts for the water committee, because they wanted something for all this work that they were doing for no pay. And, you know, t-shirts are something. So there's small adjustments that people can make within this ideology, this framework, but everyone kind of felt trapped at every level, and they're all pointing higher, right?
Thank you. So we have a question from the Zoom from Anne Oberhauser. Has this area been impacted by the insurgent violence in northern Mozambique? If so, did this conflict affect these women's mobility and access to water at the wells?
Yeah, good question. So the conflict kind of started when I had left. My last time I was there was 2018. The conflict started after coming from Cabo Delgado, now with a lot of especially internal migrants coming into Nampula from that conflict. So I wouldn't really feel comfortable saying how it's affecting women's the water access, but I think a lot of the ideology around the conflict was alive and well in Nampula, and there's a lot of conflicting interpretations of what's happening in Mozambique, but from what I've seen, there's a lot of frustration with all the crazy amount of wealth that's being generated in the country, especially in this area of mineral wealth. There's all kinds of big mining operations going in, and local people are seeing all the wealth that's being created, and they're not benefiting. Poverty rates have increased in this area over the last couple decades. At the same time, all this mineral wealth has been generated. So there's a lot of frustration, and this is a longer historical trajectory too of exploitation, especially in this region. and of the government really not being responsive to local concerns. This tends to be an area where there's more people from the minority political party feeling alienated from the government. So the point of all this is that there's a lot of frustration, anger with the government that erupted into this conflict. And it also affects the way people see aid, and is kind of in the same way that I've seen some of these government projects as kind of distant forces coming in and disrupting their lives without any understanding of what they really want. So that's the connection I can draw. I would be interested in going back and seeing how it's affecting water access now.
Any questions in the room?
Hi, I will pursue a PhD in sociology student in Mozambique. This was a very interesting presentation, so I'm pretty much interested in knowing the politics of aid here, like especially why hand pumps, and secondly, why, I mean, it's about the access to hand pumps, why they are positioned in a certain place and not the other, why is it accessible to certain people and not the other, were any of the regional social factors responsible for that? Yeah, and is the choice of hand pumps basically determined by is it just because it requires less maintenance? That like we just have to spend the aid money and that's it.
Yeah, your question about why hand pumps is a really good one. And we were part of early discussions with the MCC, encouraging them to think about a broader range of technology options, knowing that geophysics were difficult. And that's why some places got it and some didn't, like the technical reason. And also knowing that these were large dispersed communities, that one hand pump in the middle wasn't going to solve. So we were advocating for more small pipe systems that would have more taps. Really what it was is this was in Millennium Development Goal time that there was a policy, the Mozambique policy was that one hand pump equaled like 600 people served. And it was about meeting the Millennium Development Goals or showing enough progress that they would continue to get aid. And that was like the least or the most cost-effective way to show coverage and access really quickly. That was what it was. And there wasn't really a policy for the small pipe systems yet. They couldn't justify it.
We have another question from Zoom.
Yeah.
It's from Annette Mukurazia. Apologies if I mispronounce that. Is there a reason that Western empowerment leave out local values and perspective because they do not know them? Because to understand them, you have to have the ability to navigate different epistemologies.
Ooh, that's a good question. I think, yeah, so many aid organizations are stuck in this Western epistemology that's very positivist, and focus on certain things like income and independence for women and women having autonomy, and it leaves out a lot of these other dimensions that, yeah, you need other ways of knowing it and thinking to really capture well, I think. And when you do, it's hard to make those fit within the categories that aid values. So even if you find out all these interesting and rich things, trying to use a different epistemology, they don't fit within the spreadsheets that the MCC has. So I think there's that tension. Part of it is finding the right people who can translate those epistemologies, but also changing some of the values and norms and tools that are valued by development. Yeah.
More questions?
So I was just wondering, like, how did the economics of the hand pumps work? in like, how was the money kept, who kept it?
Mhm.
And then where did that money go? Was that money for maintenance or what? And then as well, in this project, when they expected women to, you know, enter
Mhm.
money-making opportunities, was any part of the project
Mhm.
meant to develop
Yeah.
any opportunity for them, or was
Yeah.
it just they'll figure it out because they'll have more time?
Yeah, good, really good questions. Yeah, so money was like, it became, to me, it was really at the heart of a lot of the sustainability challenges. And the expectation was that this money they were collecting for tariffs was supposed to be saved for if there was a breakdown of a hand pump. But that wasn't clearly explained to all the users, so they were like very suspicious, like who's getting this money, you know, who's keeping it, why? Who's responsible if it does break? And there's not rural banking, so it was really, you know, kept in under somebody's bed, and it disappeared a lot of times. You know, people say it's stolen, or that the leader ate it, or, you know, a lot of different explanations for where it went, but it created more conflict in the community about this money, who was getting rich off this hand pump. And from the literature, we also know that when a hand pump does break, this fund is usually not available. It's gone. And I had an interesting conversation with a focus group about this and asking, like, you know, what do you see as a solution to this? And somebody said, rather than like, or when we get to a certain amount, like we should buy an animal, like a chicken or a goat or something, and then everyone could see it. We would like put it by the hand pump, and then everyone could see it, and they would like know what it's for. It's very transparent compared to putting like money under your bed. And I thought that was a good idea. But yeah, the money and the conflicts it created were at the heart of a lot of these sustainability challenges. And your question about income generating activities, yeah, there were none created or imagined, or training opportunities even provided for the women that might have opened up some spaces for them. It was just like, yeah, earn income. There's just a big assumption.
I'm Johanna Crescenti and I'm Cal Global. So you had said that when you went back, all of the pumps now are working, all of the groups are disbanded. And, those community groups are covering. So, but then you also said that there's another compact now with MCC to do, I guess, a similar project. Has MCC just gone ahead to do the same kind of thing? Have they adopted a new technology? Is it now the small pipes maybe are on the table? I guess my question is, does MCC just kind of hold this up as a success story, or what have they learned?
Yeah, it is held up as a success story, and especially in relation. So it was actually a small piece of the whole compact was $500 million in Mozambique. The rural water thing was a small piece of that, but they hold that up as being the most successful part, which is kind of scary. I mean, it had the most rigorous evaluation, but what they got from the evaluation was that ERR model. So I think people that were closely connected to the project probably learned something, but the ones that just saw that ERR model probably didn't learn that much. The new compact, it's not, I don't think it's public or released yet. I just talked to this woman, and she said it was mostly focused on road construction. So she was doing the gender analysis of it for the roads. So I don't think it had a water project associated with it. You know, these compacts are happening throughout the world and throughout Africa. And I know there's a lot of focus on urban water management and privatization and things like that. So what the gender specialist was saying is there's even a stronger push towards privatization. Which is like ironic because they care so much about good governance and working with the government, but it's even moved further towards private sector.
We have another question from Zoom. from Suchitra Samanta. In a matrilineal society, did women have a voice and dialogue with the MCC?
So nowhere in any of the planning reports did MCC mention it was a matrilineal society. It was all based on these assumptions about poor African women, that they were oppressed. And the only thing they cited was one report done by a religious organization that said that women were oppressed by men and Islam. Is a very blanket statement when we all know the problems with that, but yeah, nowhere did they take time to see the difference between North and South Mozambique in terms of the power that women had in these different dimensions. So.
There's not another question here. I'm gonna ask the question. Earlier, just remembering the situation
Yeah.
you were in, and it was also reflected in your presentation here, but as a
Yeah.
student. So I'm wondering
Yeah.
how you manage the tension between being a student who is there to learn, to research what is going to find out, the truth, even though we know there's no objective truth and all that, but so
Yeah.
you're trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
But you're being funded or you're a part of in some way this project. So, and I know it, then how do you write that? And where did you write that? And how do you speak what you learned? So can you talk about the tensions a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, it was kind of hard for me internally because I was kind of working for this project in a sense that I was a student and had a role and spent more time there than anyone else with the evaluators and setting up the training for the evaluation. But yet I was pretty uncomfortable with the evaluation process. But I tried to, the evaluation was just like, 2 months at the beginning, 2 months at the end. And it was like, you can put your critical cap on, you have the funding coming in from Fulbright. So trying to distance myself from that project, and especially in the eyes of the community members, to say, I now I'm a student, and to kind of empathize with their concerns and to, spending that extra time with them rather than, going and coming like they see all the aid organizations doing. But, it was, they still had these expectations that I could change something, that I should be giving them gifts and all. So I never did that very cleanly. And it was always kind of an internal tension that I had. In terms of writing up, I did try and reflect on those moments each day, and in my field notes, it comes up a few times in the book. I talk about that when I'm presenting my findings to different audiences, how they're responding, how the community is seeing me, and it's these like small ways that you're fitting in different groups, and that they're accepting you or distrustful of you, or thinking that you're naive or silly or annoying, or depending on who you're talking to. But just trying to be open about it and reflect on it, and talk with other researchers about that too, who are trying to navigate similar dynamics.
Okay, so it is now our time, 1:31. So I want to, let's see, I have my notes, but I want to thank everybody for attending, and especially thank you, Dr. Van Houweling, for flying in and spending some days with us, and for your wonderful presentation. Like I said, we'll send you a survey. Please fill it out. It'll take you 1 minute or longer if you want to share more things, including comments that we pass on to the speaker. And then we have some great speakers lined up. Jess will be the next one, and then a food author, Nina McCurdy Firstenow, on April 13th. You can look at our website for more information. Have a wonderful day. Take some food on your way out, please, if you came in person, so not the rest of you on Zoom. So thank you very much.